Last fall, I embarked on what I thought would be another routine camping trip near my hometown. Living close to numerous trails and camping areas, I'd grown accustomed to spontaneous outdoor adventures, often deciding on a whim to pack my gear and leave the next morning. When I arrived at the trailhead about an hour from town, the parking area was empty. I secured my vehicle, shouldered my backpack, and began hiking into the familiar quiet of the forest. My mind was at peace, eyes on the ground, when suddenly the sound of breaking branches and crunching leaves shattered the silence ahead. Looking up, I spotted movement through the trees. A man was approaching at an alarming speed, not jogging, but sprinting in a full-out run. I stepped aside to let him pass, but something about him unsettled me deeply. His expression was disturbing, not exactly frightened, but wild and unfocused, as if he'd lost touch with reality. His glazed eyes looked straight through me, as though I didn't exist. After he disappeared down the trail, I continued walking, but something compelled me to look back after about 30 seconds. My stomach dropped. Far down the path, the man had stopped running and stood completely still, staring directly at me. I quickly turned away and kept moving, afraid to look back again for another half-minute. When I finally did, he had vanished, not on the trail, not anywhere visible. I was torn between two equally unnerving possibilities. Either this disturbed man was behind me, or I was walking toward whatever had caused him to flee. Since he hadn't appeared frightened, just unstable, I decided to press forward to my campsite rather than turn back toward him. I checked over my shoulder repeatedly during the hike, but saw no further sign of him. Upon reaching the campsite, an unremarkable clearing among the trees with no fire ring or distinct features, I set up my gear. The usual peaceful forest sounds now felt ominous, too quiet, as if something was watching. As darkness fell, the woods grew even more silent. Every small rustle became clearly audible. I built a small fire for light, but about an hour after sunset, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps sprinting through the forest, perhaps 100 yards away. The distinct human footfalls ran briefly, then stopped abruptly, leaving only silence. The campfire, which I'd hoped would provide comfort, now felt like a beacon advertising my exact location. In a panicked decision I'd later regret, I quickly smothered the flames. Suddenly plunged into pitch darkness, I stood frozen, listening. Then it happened again. Someone sprinting, this time directly toward my camp and much closer. They stopped suddenly, seemingly right in front of me. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out a figure partially concealed behind a tree, standing motionless, watching me. The way they stood there observing felt distinctly wrong. Not the behavior of any normal person. I couldn't determine if it was a man or woman, but I was fairly certain it wasn't the same runner from the trail. Either multiple people were surrounding my camp, or this was what the first man had been fleeing from. Fear paralyzed me. I didn't want to speak, knowing my voice would betray my terror. We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity, until the figure began backing away. Within just a few steps, they'd completely disappeared into the darkness, their footsteps fading to nothing, as if walking barefoot, deliberately silent. The silence continued for what felt like hours, though it was probably about 30 minutes. When I finally moved, I knew I had to leave immediately. I fumbled for my light and began dismantling my tent in near darkness, constantly aware that this person could be just 15 or 20 feet away in the trees. I hoped that by leaving peacefully, they'd let me go. The hike back was terrifying. Though I saw and heard nothing more, I knew how silently they could move. They could have been following me the entire way, creeping behind me through the darkness. My adrenaline sustained me all the way to my car. I drove away quickly, not lingering a moment longer than necessary. The next day, I discovered deep scratches on my car door and a broken passenger side handle. The latch had snapped as if someone had pulled it with tremendous force, attempting to break in. That discovery prompted me to file a police report, though it led nowhere. I'll never know if it was the running man or the watching figure who tried to access my vehicle. That single night destroyed my love for camping. A painful loss, but given what might have happened, I'll never camp alone again. I was backpacking alone through a state forest with an 80-mile trail system that required reservations at designated campsites. These sites, spaced miles apart for bear safety and forest preservation, also served to track who was in the wilderness and for how long. Rangers patrolled infrequently due to the trail's length. I'd reserved 2 sites, one at the 12-mile mark and another at 26 miles. After hiking to the first campsite and arriving midday, I rested through the afternoon. I hadn't encountered a single hiker, which wasn't surprising given it was off-season. I slept well that night, waking only once to what sounded like footsteps on the trail around 2 or 3 a.m. It seemed strange for anyone to be hiking at that hour, but I fell back asleep quickly. The next day's 14-mile hike took me deeper into the forest with more elevation gain. I arrived at my second campsite late, just as darkness was falling. The trail had been completely empty all day, unusually so. I tried to enjoy the solitude. Several hours later, around 9 or 10 p.m., I heard footsteps approaching from the direction I'd come, accompanied by a small headlamp beam weaving through the trees. It seemed extraordinary for someone to be hiking hours after sunset. I wondered if this was the same person from the previous night, though I couldn't understand how I hadn't passed them during the day. As the light approached, it suddenly stopped and seemed to turn toward me. Then it veered off the trail into the forest and went dark. The timing was suspicious. Just when they would have been close enough to see my campfire, they vanished, as if deliberately avoiding detection. What possible reason could someone have for leaving the trail in complete darkness and extinguishing their light? I watched that direction for 15 or 20 minutes, seeing nothing. Eventually, I rationalized that perhaps they'd set up an impromptu camp nearby, running behind schedule for their reserved site. An hour passed. For some reason, I couldn't sleep, as if my body was keeping me alert. I'm grateful it did, because suddenly I heard a quiet crunch of leaves just beyond my camp. Someone trying to step silently, far too close for comfort. I jumped up and grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the forest. 10 yards away stood a man, clearly not a hiker or backpacker. He wore ordinary clothes and carried no backpack. Strangely, he didn't move when the light hit him, as if hoping to remain unnoticed. When I shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" he hesitated as if considering whether to run, then walked toward me with a growing smile. As he approached, recognition struck me. I'd seen this face before, though I couldn't place where. We'd never spoken or been introduced. I'd only seen him in passing. Then he said my name, greeting me like an old friend. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This man had been following me, not just tonight, but for days or longer. He'd followed me all the way to the trail and into the forest, which explained why he looked nothing like a backpacker. He'd been trailing far enough behind to avoid detection, then searching for my camp at night while expecting me to be asleep. Still smiling, he walked closer as these thoughts raced through my mind. He said my name again, feigning confusion about why I seemed frightened. I grabbed my bag and backed away. His expression went flat, and he asked in a monotone voice what I was doing. I didn't answer, just strapped on my backpack and moved toward the trail. He shouted my name one more time, aggressive, angry, and his footsteps quickened. I ran, keeping my light off to try to lose him in the darkness. Thankfully, he didn't chase far, giving up after about 15 seconds near the campsite. I walked through the entire night, using my satellite emergency phone to contact authorities while putting as much distance as possible between us. Eventually, I met a park ranger several miles away from my first campsite and got out safely. They never found him. He had no vehicle at the trailhead and no reservations. To escape that forest unseen, he would have had to hike off trail for dozens of miles in the right direction. Incredibly difficult and unlikely to survive, even for an experienced backpacker, let alone an unprepared stalker. The worst part, I still don't know who he was beyond someone I'd glimpsed before. If he survived, he could still be watching me. Perhaps the previous sightings were him stalking me without my knowledge. There's a dark part of me that hopes he never made it out of that forest. A few years ago, between jobs with time on my hands, I decided to rent a camper van for an extended vacation. After running the numbers, I realized that while my savings could fund a week at a nice destination, a van would allow 3 or 4 weeks of travel. As someone who loved nature but felt uncertain about tent camping alone in remote areas, a van seemed like the perfect compromise. A secure metal shelter with the ability to drive away if needed. I headed north to national forests and public lands where free camping was permitted. The first couple of days, I stayed at truck stops overnight while driving, overly focused on finding the perfect first campsite rather than settling for a nice campground. On the third day, I finally found my opportunity. Driving through an area with nothing but public land for miles, I used an app to locate campsites others had used, marking several on my GPS. Unfortunately, none of them existed. No trails, no campers, just empty wilderness. After an hour on a rough, unpaved road, I grew frustrated, racing against sunset since finding these invisible trails would be impossible in darkness. Without cell service to search for alternatives, I kept driving. Finally, I spotted a barely visible path leading off the main road 30 minutes past my last marked campsite. The path looked even rougher than the current road, but the van could handle it. Unable to verify if this was an actual campsite, I backed up and turned onto the trail. My headlights illuminated the path as I drove slowly through the trees for about 5 minutes until reaching the end. A single small clearing barely large enough for the van. There were no other paths or campsites visible. For my first wilderness experience, being completely alone felt overwhelming. I'd hoped for nearby campers to provide some comfort. I sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, staring into the woods. A dreadful feeling settled over me, a gut instinct that something wasn't right. Normally, I would have left immediately, but frustration made me settle. I rationalized that perhaps my mind was simply panicking because I was outside my comfort zone. I turned off the van and moved to the back. It was already dark, leaving nothing to do outside until morning. I'd barely laid down when I heard crunching footsteps outside, followed immediately by a loud knock on the driver's side window. Thinking it must be another camper, I walked to the front. A man stood by the door, peering through the window at me with an awkward, apologetic smile. When I asked if everything was okay, he introduced himself as Mike, saying he wanted to greet his neighbor before it got too dark. Several things struck me as strange. I still couldn't see where he was camping or how he was this close. The sun had been down for a while. It was already quite dark. Most unsettling, the man was extremely twitchy, constantly shifting and darting his eyes past my shoulder toward the back of the van, as if expecting or waiting to see someone else emerge behind me. This made me acutely nervous about being alone. I thanked him politely, trying to end the conversation, and backed away from the window. He didn't move, just kept his feet planted, watching me retreat into the back of the van. After waiting 15 seconds, I peeked through the curtain. He was gone. I immediately checked the smaller windows around the van, searching for lights or any indication of where his campsite was or where he'd walked. Surely he'd have a lantern or flashlight to navigate the dark woods. I could see in almost every direction. No lights, no signs of movement, no indication of a nearby camp. The surrounding trees were completely dark and silent. I considered leaving but thought if I could just locate his camp, I'd feel safer, knowing he couldn't sneak up on me again. For about 20 minutes, I circled around checking windows, seeing nothing. I realized that if I couldn't figure this out, I'd have to leave, and I desperately didn't want to go through that search again. I decided to get a better look. Opening the front door, I stepped outside into the extremely quiet, nearly pitch-black forest. Even the trail I'd driven down was barely visible. I stood there, turning my head, searching for any signs, when a looming, uneasy feeling gave me chills. Again, my gut screamed to leave. That's when I heard a short shuffling sound directly behind me. I moved to the other side of the van and looked around, seeing nothing, though the sound had come from right there. Hesitating, I slowly knelt down and looked under the van. I caught only a glimpse of the man's eyes staring back at me before I jumped up and ran back inside. I heard him call out as the van shook while he crawled out from underneath. I got inside just seconds before he jumped up and started banging on the door. He was still twitching strangely, but now his eyes had a savage, animalistic, violent quality, almost like an animal with rabies. That's how insane he looked. He punched the window with everything he had. I started the van and began driving. I could hear him trying to grab on, still attempting to get inside. The trail was rough, and I couldn't risk a flat tire or getting stuck with this man chasing me. Several times during my escape, he caught up and continued trying to break in, but around halfway out, I'd gained enough distance to reach the better road. I drove 2 hours back to a small town and didn't sleep at all that night, replaying what had happened. I genuinely believe that if I'd stayed or if he'd gotten inside, I never would have left that forest alive. The look in his eyes and his crazy, sadistic behavior once I found him hiding still terrifies me to remember.